Hello everyone. Let's start with a new topic, multiculturalism. Multiculturalism is the coexistence of different cultures, existence of different people together. And this has become one of the defining ideas of contemporary political thought. And at its heart, it is a belief that societies, they are no longer homogeneous, but made up of diverse people that are divided on cultural, ethnic, and religious or linguistic backgrounds. So in that way, multiculturalism suggests that for a healthy society, different people, different cultures, they should live together peacefully while maintaining their distinct identities. So here it is about coexistence of distinctiveness, and it opposes the old idea of melting pot or assimilatory society where everyone was expected to conform to the dominant culture. Or in other words, the older assimilation model, it said that people from different background, they should dilute their distinct identities when existing together. Whereas on the other hand, multiculturalism, it respect different identities, it respect distinctiveness, and even suggests people that they should maintain their distinctive identities and should let other maintain theirs. And finally, to the topic, instead, multiculturalism it supposes the idea of mosaic society where every culture adds something unique and valuable. So the literal meaning of mosaic is the existence of different patterns in a landscape. It's like if you have tree, a house, then an animal. If these three pictures, three diagrams, three sketches, they existing on a single canvas, then it is said to be a mosaic. Now, this literal definition, it have different connotation where this thing is used. Like in biology, it means different. In psychology, in evolutionary biology, in a neuroscience, in artistry, in literal linguistics, uh, meaning of mosaic is different. My point is, yes, mosaic here it means existence of different thing, and in multiculturalism, this word fits in. Then political theorist Bhiku Parekh, he captures this idea beautifully when he says that no culture is perfect or complete in itself. Every culture has its strength and weakness, and all culture they can grow and enrich by interacting with other, by diluting their own weaknesses and gaining strength from the others. Then, in many ways, multiculturalism emerged as a political response to rising immigration, decolonization, globalization, minority right movements, especially after for the Second World War. And many Western countries, countries of the global North, and rich countries such as Canada, Australia, and United Kingdom, they have embraced this idea in their constitution, in their lifestyle. Now, the key principles of multiculturalism, first is recognition, which emphasize that every society should recognize the unique identity of different cultural groups rather than forcing them to hide or abandon their tradition or forcing them to assimilate the dominant culture. In a multicultural society, being different is not a weakness, it is a source of strength. And this distinctiveness, this difference, it should be recognized, which is the first principle. Now, the second principle is accommodation, which means it is not just enough to recognize differences. Institutions like family, education institution, political institution, workplace, government, legal institution, all of them must adapt to these differences, and such accommodation, such coexistence must reflect in their working. So these institutions must make adjustment, allow people from different background to participate equally. Now, the third principle is equality. Equality here is not about treating everyone in exactly the same manner. It is about fair treatment, which might take a cue from an ancient proverb that equal should be treated equally and unequal should be treated unequally. So here, the equality dimension, equality principle of multiculturalism, it says that providing equality means offering spatial support to minority groups, which is like affirmative action, which is like providing wheelchair to the physically disabled. And the final principle, multiculturalism, it promotes dialogue. So it encourages conversation and interaction between different culture to break the ice, to break down prejudices, and build mutual understanding. And for an example, stands Canada's multiculturalism policy of 1971, which has clearly stated that all citizens are equal and they are free to preserve, enhance, and share their cultural heritage. Now comes the major debates in multiculturalism. The first debate is about individual rights versus group rights. So one of the first dilemma is the balance between individual rights and group rights. And the question here, should the state allow cultural groups to practice tradition that may conflict with individual freedom? So to explain this, I would like to highlight two anthropological concepts. First is that of cultural relativism, and the second one is of amic approach. So amic approach is the approach to study any culture from an outsider perspective. And cultural relativism is is the belief that every culture uh, is good in itself. Every culture should be respected for what it is. Now, both things in elaborated manner. So, whenever anthropologists study any culture, being an outsider, now they cannot bring in their own perspective, they cannot bring in their own biases and prejudices, because in that way, they are not going to fully understand any culture. कैसे ये अगर वो किसी कल्चर में जाते हैं and in that culture like female genital mutations are there and even in our country there honor killings are there फिर किसी कंट्री में पर्टिकुलर किसी लाइक अफ्रीका की बात करें तो दे आर कम्युनिटीज that are deliberately obese and there is a competition for that like here in those communities obesity मोटा पेट जो है is a sign of attractiveness. Now जो anthropologist है with his own prejudices अगर वो जहाँ पे जाएगा and he would say ऐसे हम लोग तो बहुत कोशिश कर रहे हैं मोटापा कम करने की ये लोग सब पेट बढ़ा रहे हैं. So here thing is every culture has its reasons and we should not bring our own perspective and we should not judge them by our own mainstream ideas. That's the amic approach. Now the cultural relativism, which is inherently connected to this approach. Only difference is amic approach is the approach by which an outsider study any particular culture. And cultural relativism is the final idea that, or the final insight or conclusion that has been given after all those studies that कोई भी culture है, it should be left to it, left to fend for itself. It should not be judged. This culture, it should be respected for what it is. यही चीज जो है multiculturalism है. And when we are allowing different communities to stay together, we say that all distinctiveness, all differences, they will be accepted, but their differences will be agreed upon, and all they have to do is to exist in a peaceful way. Now अब किसी country में या कोई particular culture है, they have their own peculiar cultural practices. Like जैसे जो सिविल सर्विसेज की प्रिपरेशन के लिए जो आते हैं स्टूडेंट्स बहुत सारे जो है नॉर्थ ईस्ट से आते हैं लाइक दोज दैट बिलोंग टू द नागा ट्राइब्स और अदर जो नॉर्थ ईस्ट ट्राइब से आते हैं नाउ दे हैव देयर ओन फूड अदर फूड हैबिट्स एंड विच इज सुटेबल फॉर विच इज अ हॉलमार्क ऑफ देयर ओन कल्चर. अब वो यहाँ पे आते हैं और तो उनके जो फूड कंजम्पशन को लेकर उनके बिहेवियर को लेकर उनके कल्चरल प्रैक्टिसेस को लेकर बहुत सारे ऑब्जेक्शंस होते हैं. तो यहाँ पे ये चीज जो है ये मल्टीकल्चरलिज्म का साइन नहीं है. तो दैट्स द फर्स्ट डिबेट. फिर सेकंड क्वेश्चन व्हिच वी आर वेरी फैमिलियर विद, दिवाली जब भी होती है. नाउ our population it has increased to make us one of the most populous country. That's a great achievement. And the second achievement is that Many diseases, non-communicable diseases, they are increasing because of us in a sedentary lifestyle, because of our lifestyle choices. Now, if we hinge on this Diwali practice, cracking of firecrackers, bursting of firecrackers, तो यहाँ पे इस पूरे एनालिसिस में देखें तो मैनी पेशेंट्स हु आर एडमिटेड टू एनी हॉस्पिटल, फिर पॉपुलेशन बहुत ज़्यादा है तो वी आर जस्ट वी आर वेरी क्लोज टू ईच अदर नाउ। अब वहाँ पे उतना स्पेस नहीं है जितना पहले था। अब स्कूल के पास ही हॉस्पिटल है, हॉस्पिटल के पास ही मंदिर है, मंदिर के पास ही ठेका है। इस तरह से सोसाइटी चल रही है। अब ऐसे में पीपल दे इंसिस्ट ऑन practicing their own cultural hegemons, practicing their cultural thing. Now, this group right, it may jeopardize personal safety, like those who have been admitted in any such private hospital for heart malfunctions or for any such non-communicable disease that need immediate assistance. फिर ऐसे में if they keep cracking firecrackers, keep bursting firecrackers for whole night, तो यहाँ पे ग्रुप राइट्स की वजह से इंडिविजुअल राइट्स जो हैं they have come under scanner. Then, in the words of Will Kimlicka, a leading defender of multiculturalism, who argues that minority group rights can actually strengthen individual liberty by providing a stable cultural context for personal choices. Now, a very heavy line. In simple, it means if smaller groups, if they have been given their particular right, if they have been their choices and their lifestyle have been protected, उस तरीके से फिर if we have given such leeway and such respect for minority groups, then overall this would strengthen democracy. This would strengthen um, coexistence. This would strengthen society by providing a great scope for personal choices. क्योंकि फिर अब हम we are not thinking in a larger term. We are not thinking in terms of large society. हम जो फोकस है it has been narrowed down from larger group to smaller group. तो यहाँ से फोकस यहाँ पे आया है तो इससे भी जो धीरे जो छोटा ग्रुप है, स्मॉलर ग्रुप्स, या फिर जो इंडिविजुअल है वहां तक भी आ सकता है, या अल्टीमेटली पर्सनल चॉइसेस तक भी आ सकता है, इंडिविजुअल्स तक भी आ सकता है। But then there is a criticism. Here, critics like Brian Barry, who warn that too much emphasis on group rights may trap individuals, especially women and children, within oppressive cultural norms. So here, yes, even if we take cultural relativism or amic approach or group rights uh, in center, but there is a thing that there are certain cultural practices that need reform. They need to be aligned with the modern liberal ideas. और बाकी आप जानते हैं that women and children, they are always at the receiving end. Children because they are vulnerable, and women because they have the responsibility to raise this vulnerability. तो ऐसे में हम patriarchy को देख सकते हैं that if cultural practices, if they are reinforced, then in Taliban, in Afghanistan, women they are not allowed to study. तो यहाँ पे if we follow this cultural relativism, फिर तो women को जो कोई right नहीं मिलेगा. Then there's a famous example is the debate over whether Muslim communities should have religious courts for family dispute in Western countries. Uh, Here the thing is, even if Muslim communities are allowed the separate religious courts for family things, for for civil disputes, but the problem is uh, this gesture of respecting cultural autonomy may endanger women's right. You may have heard about triple talaq. So it's a very simple thing. Just call your spouse and then pronounce talaq 3 times, and then it's over. Your lifelong adversity, your lifelong thread of this holy communion, it has been severed by 3 words. तो इससे प्रॉब्लम women को ज़्यादा है कि फर्स्ट कल्चरल प्रैक्टिसेस, उनकी वजह से ये women पढ़ नहीं पाई तो they have not been able to become financially independent. फिर एजुकेशनल अपॉर्चुनिटीज नहीं है उनके पास। तो अब अगर when they are around 45 to 50 years of age with lots of responsibility on their head, with vulnerable children in their laps, अब कोई आदमी ट्रिपल तलाक, 3 बार तलाक बोल के उनको छोड़ देगा रोड पे, तो वे विल देखो। तो यहाँ पे the respect for cultural autonomy, it may endanger many such rights or may expose many such vulnerabilities. Then the other debate is about tolerance versus endorsement. So the debate is whether multiculturalism should merely tolerate cultural differences or actively promote them. So here, in the words of Charles Tyler in his essay "The Politics of Recognition," who argues that mere tolerance is not enough. Societies must positively affirm and respect different identities to promote dignity. So this is a scenario when we assume that the distinctiveness, it doesn't need any reform. Means cultural things, they are different and they are not that bad. Even if they have um, peculiar folk song, peculiar artifacts, or the way they live their life, at least they have some form of justice at home. They are not indulging in any wrong practices. In that scenario, we should assume that however strange they seem, we should respect them and we should positively affirm such differences. And this debate often comes up in discussion about public funding for minority language school or cultural festivals. So here there are two strands. Some critics says that public money should not be wasted on such particular cultural identities, whereas the counter arguments, they say that such support is necessary to correct historical disadvantage. So this is again a matter of debate. Where the third debate is about integration versus separatism. The major worry with world multiculturalism, whether it encourages different groups to live separately or rather integrating them into a shared society. So again, the debate is about integration and separatism in a way that if you allow different groups to live on their own in to provide them with the autonomy to live their life in the way their culture does. But this thing, it may promote separatism क्योंकि आपने उनको अलग कर दिया. Now they are not just different, they are separate. So there is a difference between being different and being separate. So that's the debate here. That if we allow people to promote their own distinctiveness, this gesture may lead to their separation, their isolation, and finally, this may increase the tendency of separatism. And Amartya Sen, in his work Identity in Violence, he warns that if you separate people, if you define people only on single identity like religion or ethnicity, this would be akin to separating them from society, which would end up in social fragmentation and even violence. Then the 2005 London bombing, it prompted many to ask whether multicultural policies had allowed to isolate communities or the spark was already there. Now, the debate that the London bombing in spark is about whether this isolation, this separatehood, it was the work of this multiculturalism, whether people themselves have provided the spark just by being good. Like you separated them, you asked them to live the way you have always lived. Now, with this thing, you are not just respecting their distinctiveness, you have separated them because the sufficient engagement is not there. So without that feedback loop, the isolation, it acted like a pressure cooker और फिर जो उसको एक spark की जरूरत थी, and then spark ended up in London bombing. So multiculturalism, it must balance respective difference with building common citizenship, with dialogue, with the feedback loop, with sufficient engagement. Now the forms of multiculturalism. First, liberal multiculturalism, which is a blend of two ideas, liberalism and multiculturalism. So it says that uh, cultural diversity can be harmonized with liberal values of individual freedom and equality. So it sees that cultural membership is important for personal autonomy, but it also insists about preserving, protecting basic rights. So two things. First, cultural autonomy, and then provision of basic rights. And this view was championed by Will Kemlicka, who advocated group differentiated rights within a liberal framework, which in practice means that the indigenous rights or indigenous political autonomy, it should be recognized. And such groups, they would be provided bilingual education along with providing basic liberal rights for all. In other words, very simple thing, liberal idea about provision of basic services, provision of basic rights. So two things, cultural autonomy and basic rights, both should be provided. Then the pluralist multiculturalism, which in the words of Bhikkhu Parekh, who challenges the idea that liberal values are universal. And pluralist, they argued that different culture have different conception of good life. They have their own life. That's why they are different. And all of such conception, all of such worldviews should be respected. And here, pluralist multiculturalism encourages mutual learning and transformation between culture, integration between culture, accommodation between culture rather than assimilation. And classic example is from the Constitution of India, which has provided religious and linguistic minorities protection for religious and linguistic minority via Article 29 and 30. Then comes the cosmopolitan multiculturalism. The cosmopolitan is a view where whole world is like a global village, an integrated society. So here, cosmopolitan thinkers like Jeremy Waldron, they view multiculturalism as a stepping stone towards global citizenship or being integrated into global coexistence, global village kind of thing. And in a highly interconnected world, individuals can develop multiple overlapping identities that transcend narrow national and ethnic loyalties. So, yes, this view is different from the other one. And here, uh, this view is talking about the latest trend or the emerging trend in the mobility of people. So, globalization की वजह से many such cultural identities, they are fusing into one another. Cosmopolitan identities are building, hybrid identities are emerging. So SMA, we should try to achieve that global status. When identities are being fused up, when differences are melting, as is the situation may, we should strive towards achieving that status of global citizenship. Example, in cities like New York, London, Toronto, they showcase this cosmopolitan ethos where cultural blending create dynamic and hybrid identity. Now, multiculturalism in practice, most such example is from Canada with its Canadian Multiculturalism Act of 1988, which recognizes and promote cultural diversity, and it has programs that support immigrant integration, language training, and cultural celebrations. And the second example from the United Kingdom, where multicultural policies began in the 1970s and which respected religious and ethnic diversity. However, following events like 2001 Bradford riots, they had been shifted towards promoting community cohesion alongside diversity. Then India is another example where Constitution recognizes religious freedom under Article 25, cultural and education rights under Article 29 and 30, and regional autonomy through federalism. And Australia, It also adopted multiculturalism in 1970s. Now, the criticism of multiculturalism. So, some argue that it fosters separatism and parallel society, which ultimately weaken social solidarity. Now, famous quote, former German Chancellor Angela Merkel, she famously declared in 2010 that multiculturalism had utterly failed in Germany. फिर ये separatism dimension अभी आपको समझाया that it's like pushing someone, labeling someone as different, and even if you believe that um, you have left them to live on their own, it's like protecting their own lifestyle. But this gesture, like leaving them to live on their own, it ultimately fosters separatehood or separatism, or this idea, parallel society. Then other criticize cultural relativism, जो आपको बताया, the idea that all cultural practices should be respected equally. Then this protection of the cultural practices, this can also conflict with universal human rights like forced marriages, honor killing, child marriages. So these things they cannot be justified in the name of culture. And finally, many scholars like Taruk Madud warn that the instrumental use of multiculturalism by politicians to win minority rights, policy of minority appeasement, it can cause systemic inequalities. Now let's look at multiculturalism and contemporary challenges. The first challenge, globalization, migration, and new social movements, they demand renewed attention to diversity and inclusion. और उसके साथ in comparison, the world over there has been rise of populist and nationalist movement that want to reclaim the national unity. So SMA, these expansionist trend, globalization and migration, they are facing a backlash from the reclamation of national unity, so which is again a key threat to multiculturalism. Where India maybe there has been debate over Citizenship Amendment Act, the protection of minority rights, National Register of Citizens, mob lynching, the minority targeting, bulldozer politics. All of them they have made multiculturalism a key political issue here. So the future of multiculturalism it lies not in abandoning the idea, but refining it by ensuring that diversity is balanced with common citizenship, rights with responsibilities, and cultural pride with intercultural dialogue. Thing is that diversity will be there because diversity ultimately depends on geography. If you have separate geography, then the environmental condition, the natural pressure, they will shift you towards selecting a different lifestyle. You cannot have the people of this earth, they cannot have a single uniform lifestyle. Oh, the polar people, they have different lifestyle, they have different clothing, they have different songs, they have different languages, they have different food, they have different bodily practices. And in the same, the people of desert, like people of Sudan, people of Africa, people of Rajasthan, they have their own different cultural practices. Now, food practices दोनों की same हो सकती नहीं. Clothing, I have taken two examples because this polar thing, it is an example of cold condition, where the desert is an example of hot atmosphere, hot climate. यहाँ पे दोनों के clothing same नहीं हो सकती, food practices same नहीं हो सकती, environmental pressure same नहीं हो सकते, acclimatization same नहीं हो सकता. So diversity, so it is bound to be there. So this thing, diversity and the distinctive cultural practices, they can be balanced with common citizenship. Then, if you give people rights, then they had to be responsibilities. The reform dimension, like if they are a certain culture that have distinct cultural practices, if they are peculiar, like they have their own peculiar headgear, they have their own peculiar cultural song, peculiar practices, they are acceptable. Accept what you can accept, but certain things that cannot be accepted, certain like genital mutilations, they cannot be accepted. Female feticide, it cannot be accepted. The female subjugation, it cannot be accepted. And then there are many ugly practices that need to be done away with. So here, if you are giving rights, then responsibility should be there. Then cultural pride, that each culture should be respected. Cultural relativism should be there, but it should be uh, complemented with intercultural dialogue, so that the cultural groups, they should feel different but not isolated. They should not feel that they have been separated, they have been marginalized. As a condition make, these conditions are fertile, quite ripe for secessionist tendencies, for separate statehood, for violence, for terrorism. So intercultural dialogue is like a feedback loop that fuses such tensions. And finally, important thinkers was Bhikkhu Parekh, who emphasized intercultural dialogue and mutual respect. And then Tyler is there, who highlighted the importance of recognition. And then Amartya Sen, who warns against singular identity that leads to violence. So this is it. And if there is something that I might not have taken up, something that I have not explained in full fervor, something that has skipped the radar, then you can drop the comments. और उसके अलावा the all time poncho, kindly subscribe the channel if you haven't, and spread the words. And in a few time, I am going to finish UGC, then UPSC. So you should stay connected if you like the content. And if there are suggestions for me, drop the comments. This is it. Thanks again.